hive's weight tells you an extraordinary amount. Daily weight gain shows the strength of the nectar flow. Daily weight loss shows winter consumption rate. A sudden weight change signals swarm activity, water collection periods, or a serious colony problem. Amish beekeepers of the 1880s turned this logic into a system. A simple platform scale, daily records, and patterns accumulated across years. This system reduced the need to open hives by 80%. And when they did open them, they knew exactly what they were looking for. Today, hive monitor companies sell this idea for hundreds of dollars. The Amish built it in 1880 for a few dollars. The biology behind hive weight data has not changed since then. A nectar flow that adds 2 pounds per day to a scale hive is the same biological event, whether the scale underneath it was built from cast iron in 1882 or from a wireless sensor in 2024. The data is identical. The cost is not. What the modern industry sells as innovation was standard Amish farm practice for 40 years before the first commercial beekeeping supply catalog suggested it was anything unusual. The physical construction of the Amish hive scale was deliberately simple, not because the Amish lacked access to more sophisticated instruments, but because simplicity in the field meant reliability across decades of daily use without maintenance, calibration service, or replacement parts. The standard Amish scale hive platform was built from a cast iron or heavy steel plate platform mounted on a lever arm balanced against a known counterweight, producing a reading in whole pounds without requiring the beekeeper to estimate fractional values. The entire mechanism was exposed to weather and required only the most basic maintenance, an occasional application of lard or rendered fat to the pivot point to prevent rust seizure. No batteries, no calibration drift, no software updates. A well-built Amish platform scale remained accurate to within 1 pound across 40 years of daily outdoor use. The hive sat directly on the platform without modification. No special adapter, no bottom board replacement, no hive stand reconfiguration. The beekeeper approached from the side, read the indicator, recorded the value, and departed. The reading took less time than unlocking a smartphone. For beekeepers managing 10 or more colonies, one scale hive was sufficient to serve the entire apiary, because the scale hive was not intended to monitor individual colony performance in isolation. The daily recording protocol was the behavioral discipline that converted the scale from a passive instrument into an active management system. And it was the element whose consistent execution most reliably distinguished the apiaries that extracted full informational value from the scale, from those that occasionally weighed a hive and found the single data point meaningless without context. The Amish protocol required a daily reading at the same time each morning, before significant forager departure, but after the overnight temperature stabilization had ended the thermal contractions and expansions that could cause minor platform reading variations. The practical window was 15 to 30 minutes after sunrise, early enough that few foragers had departed, and the hive's weight represented its overnight state, late enough that the morning thermal equilibrium had stabilized the scale's mechanical behavior. The reading was recorded in a simple 3-column format: date, today's weight, difference from yesterday. The difference column was the primary analytical tool. A positive difference indicated net gain. More weight entered the hive than left it. A negative difference indicated net loss. The magnitude of each day's difference told the beekeeper whether the colony was in a flow, in a dearth, consuming winter stores, or experiencing an unusual event. The nectar flow detection capability of the scale hive was the application that delivered the most immediate and most consistently actionable information in the Amish management system. Before the scale, a beekeeper knew the nectar flow had started when he opened a hive and found nectar in the cells, a discovery that was already several days behind the flow's actual commencement. With the scale, the beekeeper knew the nectar flow had started on the specific morning when the daily difference shifted from negative or neutral to positive for the first time in the season. This precision had direct management consequences. The superaddition decision, the excluder management decision, and the drawn comb deployment decision all depended on knowing when the flow had actually started, rather than when it was expected to start based on a calendar estimate of local bloom timing. A beekeeper adding supers 3 days before a flow that was predicted to start on a calendar date would find the colony unprepared if the flow started 5 days early due to warm weather. A beekeeper reading the scale would add supers on the exact morning the first positive daily difference appeared, ensuring that drawn comb was in place from the flow's actual first day regardless of what the calendar said. The winter store assessment application of the scale hive addressed one of the most consequential and most commonly mishandled management decisions in the annual beekeeping calendar, determining whether each colony had sufficient honey stores to survive the winter without starvation. The conventional approach to winter store assessment required opening each hive in October, lifting frames to estimate their weight by feel, and making a judgment about total stores based on partial visual and tactile information gathered through a disruptive inspection that also exposed the colony to cold temperatures during the period when its cluster was consolidating for winter. The scale hive method required none of this. In October, after the colony had completed its nectar collection for the season, and before cold temperatures made inspection disruptive, the beekeeper recorded the total hive weight from the scale. He then subtracted the known tare weight of the equipment, the empty hive box weight, the frames, the lid, and the bottom board, all measured once and recorded permanently. The remainder was the combined weight of bees, comb, and stores. From this, subtracting an estimated live bee cluster weight of approximately 4 to 6 pounds for a healthy colony, the beekeeper arrived at the net store weight. The swarm detection application of the scale hive was perhaps the most counterintuitive of the system's capabilities. Counterintuitive because it detected swarm events through weight loss rather than through direct observation, and because the weight loss signature of a swarm departure was specific enough to be distinguished from other causes of rapid weight change. A honeybee swarm departs the hive as a cohesive mass of bees, typically between 10 and 20,000 individuals, carrying a substantial quantity of honey in their stomachs as fuel for their search for a new nest cavity. The departure of this bee mass produces a measurable and immediate weight reduction in the scale hive. A colony of 60,000 bees weighs approximately 12 pounds in adult bee mass alone, at roughly 200 milligrams per bee. A swarm of 15,000 bees represents approximately 3 pounds of bee mass. Combined with the honey those bees carried, a typical swarm departure reduced the scale hive weight by 3 to 5 pounds in a single morning reading. This signature, a sudden 3 to 5 pound drop on a day when weather and forager conditions made normal forager losses an insufficient explanation, was identifiable in the daily difference column as an anomaly requiring immediate investigation. Pre-swarm weight data provided an additional layer of detection. The water collection period detection capability of the scale hive revealed a seasonal biological event that most beekeepers observe without understanding its management implications. In late winter and early spring, specifically during the period when brood rearing resumes after the winter break but before the first nectar sources have opened, colonies experience a sharp increase in water demand. Developing larvae require diluted brood food that nurse bees prepare from water and stored honey or pollen, and the water demand of a colony entering early spring brood expansion can exceed the winter cluster's ability to obtain it from ambient humidity condensation inside the hive. Colonies send out water foragers in temperatures that would suppress nectar foraging entirely. Foragers have been documented leaving hives for water collection at temperatures as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit, while nectar foraging requires sustained temperatures above 50 degrees. The scale hive's signature of the early spring water collection period was a modest positive daily difference, typically between 1/4 pound and 3/4 of a pound per day, occurring before any local nectar source was open and persisting for 1 to 3 weeks until the first nectar sources provided liquid directly. This signature told the Amish beekeeper 2 things simultaneously. The consumption rate monitoring application provided one of the scale system's most practically valuable winter management capabilities, the ability to track exactly how quickly each colony was burning through its winter stores and project whether those stores would last until spring forage arrived without requiring a single hive opening during the critical cluster consolidation period. A healthy winter cluster consumes honey at a rate that varies with external temperature, cluster size, and the presence or absence of active brood rearing. In a sealed winter cluster at peak cold, January temperatures in the -10 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit range typical of Ohio and Pennsylvania Amish country, consumption rates of 20 to 40 grams per day per 1,000 bees have been documented in controlled studies. For a 5-pound winter cluster of approximately 23,000 bees, this translates to a daily consumption of between 1 and 2 pounds of honey per week during peak cold. The scale hive's daily difference column in winter showed this consumption as consistent, small negative values, typically between -1/4 and -1/2 pound per day in cold weather, rising to -1/2 to -3/4 of a pound per day during periods of active early spring brood rearing. The multi-year pattern library that accumulated from consistent scale hive recording was the dimension of the system that separated it most completely from any single-season diagnostic tool, and that gave experienced Amish beekeepers a predictive capability that no modern single-season hive monitor can replicate. After 3 years of daily scale records for the same apiary location, the beekeeper possessed something of extraordinary management value: a site-specific biological calendar showing the typical date range for nectar flow commencement from every local plant species, the typical flow strength from each source measured in daily weight gain rates, the typical post-flow dearth period duration, and the typical winter consumption trajectory for colonies of various population sizes in that specific microclimate. This site-specific calendar was more accurate than any published regional bloom calendar because it captured the actual biological response of bees in that specific location, rather than the average of a broad region. After a decade of records, the pattern library became genuinely predictive. When the scale showed an early spring water collection period beginning 2 weeks earlier than the 10-year average, the beekeeper knew he was in an early season and calibrated his super addition, swarm management, and split timing forward accordingly. The robbing season detection capability added another layer of practical value to the scale system during the late summer and early autumn period, when nectar dearth made robbing a significant colony management concern. Robbing, the invasion of weaker colonies by foragers from stronger ones seeking to steal stored honey, produces a scale signature that is distinguishable from normal nectar flow weight gain because it occurs outside the established flow season, typically in August and September, when the daily difference column has returned to neutral or slightly negative values as the summer dearth sets in. A sudden positive weight gain of 1 to 3 pounds per day during established dearth conditions was not a belated nectar flow. It was a robbing event. The scale hive, if it was the robber colony, showed the gain. If the scale hive was being robbed, it showed an unusual loss during what should have been a minimal consumption period. Both signatures were actionable. The robbing gain signature prompted the beekeeper to investigate which colonies in the apiary were losing weight, typically the weakest colonies, recently split units, or colonies with health problems that had reduced their defensive capacity. The robbing loss signature prompted immediate entrance reduction to minimum width, allowing the colony's guard bee population to defend a smaller opening. The economic argument for maintaining a scale hive system in the modern apiary is, if anything, stronger today than it was in the 1880s. Because the information value of the data has not changed, but the cost of the alternative has increased dramatically. A cast iron platform scale built to Amish specifications can be constructed for under $50 in current materials. A digital hive monitor with wireless connectivity, smartphone integration, and cloud data storage retails between $200 and $400 per unit, requires annual subscription fees for data services in some configurations, depends on batteries or solar charging that can fail in winter conditions, and generates data that most beekeepers lack the interpretation framework to extract full management value from, because the company's dashboard presents alerts rather than raw data patterns. The Amish scale generated raw data, daily weight numbers, that the beekeeper interpreted through the accumulated pattern library he built across seasons of consistent recording. This interpretation framework was entirely free and grew more valuable with each year of use. The digital monitor's interpretation is provided by an algorithm calibrated to average population data rather than to the specific colony, specific microclimate, and specific forage calendar of the beekeeper's own operation. The specific historical context of scale hive use in 19th century American apiculture illuminates both the system's documented effectiveness and the economic forces that prevented its universal adoption among commercial beekeepers even before the digital era made it redundant in the industry's narrative. Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth himself maintained a scale hive and referenced weight data in his management observations, noting in correspondence from the 1870s that daily hive weights provided colony health information that no amount of visual inspection could reliably detect. AI Roots Gleanings in Bee Culture carried scale hive correspondence from readers across the Midwest through the 1880s and 1890s, with contributors documenting flow detection, winter assessment, and swarm detection applications in language that differed from the Amish method described in this video only in the geographic specifics. The 1897 Manual of Apiculture, produced by the Ohio State Board of Agriculture, included scale hive maintenance as a recommended practice for serious honey producers. By the 1920s, the practice had become less prominent in extension literature as the commercial honey industry's focus shifted toward maximizing colony counts and honey throughput in ways that made per-colony instrumentation economically unattractive at scale. The construction specifications for replicating the Amish platform scale in a modern apiary context require minimal woodworking skill, no specialized tools, and materials available at any hardware supply or farm store, at a total cost well under $50. The platform itself requires a 12 by 20 inch piece of 3/4 inch exterior plywood or solid timber treated for moisture resistance, large enough to support a standard Langstroth hive box with a standard 18 by 22 inch footprint without tipping risk. The weighing mechanism can take two practical forms depending on the beekeeper's preference and available materials. The first form, the traditional Amish lever balance, uses a 1-inch hardwood dowel as a fulcrum mounted in a notched support block, with the platform on one end and a calibrated counterweight on the other. The counterweight pre-weighted to zero the platform against the tare weight of the empty hive equipment. The indicator is a simple pointer mounted at the fulcrum point that deflects against a graduated scale as the hive weight changes. This mechanism requires no purchased components beyond the dowel, the timber, and a small amount of hardware cloth for the indicator face. The hive scale system represents something broader than an efficient management tool for individual beekeeping operations. It represents the class of observation-based practices that the modern beekeeping industry consistently undervalues because they generate no recurring revenue stream. Because a beekeeper who builds a scale hive and records daily weights for 10 years has built a management asset that costs him nothing annually and grows more valuable with each year of use. The industry's economic model requires consumables, replacements, and subscriptions. The scale hive requires a pencil and a ledger. This is not incidental. The digital hive monitor companies that have rediscovered the weight monitoring concept in the 21st century have added wireless transmission, cloud storage, smartphone alerts, and subscription data services to a biological measurement that requires none of those additions to produce its core management value. The additions create revenue. They do not improve the fundamental data.